Okay, sorry.
No worries.
On the second one, I was like, oh boy.
You were in great spirits about it, though.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
I have one of those children, so I just kind of know. Yeah, but he apparently broke his shoe, and so he's been walking around with just one shoe on, and they're like, can you bring him extra shoes? I'm like, how do you break a shoe?
Might be a good lesson to walk around with the one shoe.
Yeah, he's already learning a lesson this morning because he threw away his lunch yesterday, and so I didn't pack him one. I said, you could eat school lunch, and he's very upset about learning that lesson today, so...
That's called microlearning right there. I mean, if we're going to be like totally honest, there it is. You just learned a lesson that's timely right now.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Well, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Inside the Process, where we sit down with some of the brightest minds in business to dig into all of their process secrets and best practices to help you continuously improve and level up the work that you're doing. I'm Mallory, a 10-year systems and ops veteran turned marketer, and I'm here with Shawn, the super awesome training and dev guy, better known around here as Mentor Shawn, as you all know.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here with you. And I could not be more stoked for our guest today. This is Sarah Berry. We discovered each other, I think, on LinkedIn, mainly because we were both posting and talking about the same types of things, which is really surrounding how training and development can and should be both effective and fun, right? So Sarah is the founder of Out of the Office Learning, and she's pretty much done it all. She's from classroom training and online course design to building entire training programs for the likes of companies like Nielsen and AT&T, Comcast, Volvo, and Lululemon. So you really helped them to level up their training programs. I'm really, really excited. The thing about Sarah that has stood out to me the most in our brief little relationship over LinkedIn here has been her passion for bringing fun and humor and lightheartedness to the workplace learning. And gosh, I share that 100%. So Sarah, I'm so excited. Welcome to Inside the Process.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with both of you.
Super excited to have you. Well, Sarah, I have to share a story. So I have this vivid memory of sitting in a packed, what I like to call kind of state of the art, if you think about, investing millions into a beautiful training facility. And this room had 50 plus people. Some even had, their laptops out at these brand new, big long tables as the trainer stood at the front of the room, clicking through their slides on a TV, probably the size of the wall. And I remember kind of glancing around and noticing that half of the people were either multitasking on those laptops or on their phones, or the other half looked like their eyes just completely glazed over. And I thought, man, what a bummer. What a waste of a beautiful space, an investment on behalf of the company. And yet this whole audience is completely disengaged. And if we're being really honest here, they were kind of wasting their time. And I think the trainer was wasting their time too, which was a really unfortunate situation for everyone. And training, I think, has since become a lot more self-serve, thank God. But even with companies finally getting on the online training bus with a world that's a lot more remote now in many, many cases, or people who can have training, on the product floor or on the production floor, I still see the same terrible PowerPoints and exhaustingly long videos where folks are just talking at you for 30 minutes. My husband's an HVAC guy. He's actually a specialist, like a tech, and now he has to train his team. They're a 10,000 plus person company, and the training is like, gag me, okay? It's so bad. I'm like, how do you have designated trainers, teams full of trainers, and your training, quite frankly, sucks? And I know there's a better way. And you often emphasize creating learning experiences rather than training employees. So tell us why that distinction is so important and how can we truly create a fun and retainable training experience for everyone?
Yeah, so the scenario you just described seems to be the default, right? It's more often that we get that situation, that scenario, than we get the fun training. And in my mind, I think training should be the fun organization, the where you go off to relax and learn something new. And unfortunately, it ends up being this case where the company spends all this money and where's the ROI for that? They're not really seeing it. So you get a bunch of people really bored, just as you described. And so I think the reason for that is you go away to training, you disrupt your day. So it's already disruptive. It's not built into your everyday life. If you're going to say training versus learning, I would say learning is more embedded in our everyday lives. We're learning all the time, every single day. I might drive to the grocery store and miss my turn and find a shortcut that I didn't know existed. That's unintentional learning. It's something that helps me get to the grocery store faster, as just a silly example. But, we're learning all the time. And if we could bring that into a culture of learning in the workplace, where maybe learning is owned by everybody, not just the training department, but maybe we're learning from our managers. Maybe we're learning from our peers, from each other, and we're looking forward to it. We're craving it. I think one thing that I like to look at this as a, sort of an analogy is when people say, I love to dance, but I hate to exercise. So in my mind, when I hear someone say that, I'm thinking, but you did exercise. You just went out at night for 4 hours. You danced the night away and you did cardio, which is, the most dreadful type of exercise for 4 hours. So I think we can do something similar with training where it's training masked as entertainment, masked as connection with others, and that sort of thing. I think people are really drawn to podcasts and YouTube videos, and there's a reason for that. You'll listen to a 3.5-hour podcast on a topic that you like because you're engaged. And so we need to start looking at what these other mediums and other industries are doing to engage their audience, because training certainly isn't doing it, unfortunately. But every other medium out there is doing it. You've got social media, you've got streaming services, you've got, heck, even conferences that you go to for your job. Those are even engaging. And technically that's educational. But again, it's wrapped in that blanket of entertainment, connection, and all these other things that are built to engage. And I think if we could shift the mindset, among many other things, but first it's got to be a mindset shift, we can really build these cultures of learning inside a workplace and, make our learners actually crave learning and want to talk about it after they leave the class.
So many things in work and in life are a mindset shift. And so I love that translates here to training as well. And I think, Shawn, we could just start a second podcast called like Growth Mindset or something, because it's always at the root of everything that we do. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, I love that too. In fact, that fits right in. I've got a question I want to ask you. The other day I posted on LinkedIn about time constraints, okay? And a training and time constraints in training. And I had one of my commenters hopped on and said this. He said, I hear business owners talk about how time used for training is time away from doing the work. And, I thought I agreed with him. I was like, hey, if the training isn't very good, then he's 100% right. Okay. But I want to riff on this just a little bit. I want to kind of unpack this a little bit. Why do you think that this is such a common mindset? Talk about these mindsets. Why do you think this is such a common one for leaders today?
Yeah, so I think training, as I mentioned, is a separate them. The training department is over there. And so if you're in charge of a business unit that is, looking for business results to be changed because of training, and then maybe the leaders over the learning organization are talking a completely different language. They're saying, how many butts in seats? You know, we got 90% of people finished this training. Okay, great. That means you're good at scheduling, or that means you're good at emailing to remind people to take the training. But does that mean that they actually got something out of it? So you're kind of speaking two totally different languages from the beginning. You're already set up for failure in that way. And I think also as learning professionals, we really don't express the return on investment very well. It's something that can't really be measured immediately. So it's not like you go to class and, you know, these leaders send off their team to class and then they immediately return and you can say, yep, everything's better. We waved a magic wand. You're excellent at this. You're excelling at this. You know, everything's magically better. It's not like that. You can measure it over a longer period of time. And there's a, you know, sort of a spectrum for that. But the other thing is, and I think leaders can actually do this themselves, they don't have to be a training professional or a learning professional, is the follow-up after. Why are we missing that? There's no follow-up after. So let's say you're a manager. Let's say you're in a call center, which is very specific to not wanting people to leave the phones. Your phone time is a really big deal in call centers. So let's say you send your team to training. You're waiting there with your watch, waiting for them to come back, right? You want them back in the seats, doing their call time and doing their job. Well, they come back and you probably have your morning huddles. You probably have individual meetings with them. Why don't you take someone that went to the class and say, hey, what are 3 things you learned from this class? And maybe we can share it with the rest of the team. Maybe part of the team didn't get to go to the class. Maybe you have someone on the team that kind of is the shoe-in to be next manager, like they're really good at mentoring others. Maybe they can teach back the concepts that they learned if they were in class. You know, the biggest drop-off is the stat that I learned. Apparently, we forget half the information we learn within an hour. So if you're not reinforcing it, if you're not writing it down, if you're not teaching it back, it's just gone. And I think almost 70-something% is gone within 24 hours. So again, if you're not reinforcing or filling in those gaps in between those bigger training events, then it's just gone. And all that money is wasted. All that money, time, and effort.
Yeah, I so agree with that one. That's one of the things that I have seen for me personally, right? I go to a training, I leave that, and it's almost like you go to one of these motivational speaking events, right? This is one of my biggest pet peeves about motivational speaking events. You go, you get all fired up, like, yeah, I'm totally going to do that. It's going to be amazing. And then you walk out that door, and then you're like, that was fun. I remember I was excited, but now what? And if there's no follow-up, yeah, there's no way for me to reinforce, to continue the learning. And that ties right back to what we've been talking about here with those leaders and not seeing the return on the investment, right?
Yeah, I literally was over here and I'm like, Shawn, I got to ask her. She said this so many times. You keep talking about the ROI for training. And I have to know, like, what does this look like? Because I feel like people listening are probably feeling this way as well. Like, how do I showcase that to both my team and also to our leaders? And I'm a broken record with this almost, I think, on every podcast at this point, but those are 2 very different conversations with like what's a benefit to your team versus leadership. So can you talk to us about the benefits for each and how we kind of see that return on investment?
Yeah. So for ROI, I like to talk about it when it comes to new hire, because I think that's the most important part. And if a company doesn't have any other training, chances are they do at least have a new hire or some sort of onboarding, even if it's not like a solid program, maybe even if it still needs some work done. So I think when you talk about ROI, you can say all that money spent in hiring that's lost when people leave within a certain amount of days or a certain amount of months. Because at that point, I know there's a statistic that says, it goes around a lot, you might have seen it, 20% of people leave a job within the first 45 days. So the first 45 days is only a month and a half. That's a very short window. To me, that either is training or lack of, or the culture. They don't feel like they fit in. And those 2 things can be measured with ROI. I mean, with the hiring costs, you're spending so much money either per head, or if you're on a hiring frenzy where you're hiring a ton of people at a time, you can just compare those numbers. And I think when you speak the language of whatever business unit that you're creating training for, that's really what is going to help you start to open the mind. Okay, we need better training. We need it to be funded because these things aren't free. Sometimes you're hiring outside people. Sometimes you're creating multi-million-dollar classes with these state-of-the-art classrooms. And in order to do that, you've got to show that it's going to be a return and something positive is going to come from it.
I love that.
One of the things that I always come back to, and leaders in particular, because I've worked with and I've been with in the conversations about training, and that shift of mindset is a really powerful one. You know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are some, if I'm a leader that I'm kind of hearing this right now, going, okay, what are some shifts that I need to make, and how can I start doing that? What are some things I can do right now?
I think number one, everything's about the learner. So instead of assuming that we know what's best just because we're a leader or because we're in a learning profession, we don't know what's best. We have to ask. And, you know, sometimes I go into client work or working past full-time jobs that I had, and I ask, hey, what's the last learning survey we've done? Have we asked our learners what they want? And it's so funny to even say the word learners because we are all learners. We're learners too. We've sat in that seat. So if we could just ask ourselves, this is something you could do immediately. Ask yourself, would I like this training? Would I sit through this training? I mean, that's the quickest, easiest thing you can do. But truly, it's all about learners and what they want. And I think our working world and the world in general is changing so fast, but our training really isn't keeping up. We've got, you know, we scroll all day. We're looking at social media. We're looking at streaming, podcasts, YouTube, television, all these things that are begging for your employees' attention. And so we've got to make up for that somehow. But yes, it's all about the learners. If you could do surveys, focus groups, those things are like mandatory every year, minimum every year. I would say more often. Typically when I ask, hey, when's the last learner survey you've done? It's maybe 3 years ago. It's always, I don't know, but maybe 3 years ago we did something like that. So they're not really, people in general are not really looking at what learners actually want. That would never be the case with an ad campaign. Advertising agency would never not ask what their audience wants. A salesperson would never not look at their target audience. A television show wouldn't ever put a television show in production without knowing who might be watching it. We're not looking at these things. Everything else is looking at how to engage their audience. And I feel like we're missing that piece, but we see it all around us.
I think you painted such a good picture there too, with the attention that just our like cell phones in general demand of us, with GIFs and memes and Reels and TikToks and YouTube videos and all the things, right? Like we're just constantly scrolling and getting those dopamine hits. And you have to replicate that to some magnitude within training. And at my last company, that's where I found Trainual and implemented Trainual. I was in a very let me find the right words here. Very like rigid, not very modern type of company. And our executive team was like, hey, you have to stop putting GIFs in your trainings. They're distracting. They're unprofessional, all the things. And I was like, okay. So we live in this very modern world where people see this type of like fun and engaging content on their phones all the time. But you want me to just have walls of text in their training. And on the flip side of that, I'm also responsible for getting our training and retention to a 70% in the app. Let me make sense of all of this real quick. Let me just level set with you for a second. And I think it's an impossible task that you're asking of people if you're not willing to get with the times and start to make training more fun and engaging and use resources beyond the walls of text.
I'm so surprised that they said GIFs were unprofessional. That's how rude. That's so bad. Gifts are great. Everyone loves them. I'll stand on that.
This is interesting because it reminds me 10 years ago, I was working in education. I was working with kids, right? And I was helping teachers to build fun and engaging lessons for their students at the time. What's pretty fascinating about this, and we were talking about exactly what we just talked about. Your experience, Mallory, that you just brought up, this is what we're talking about is, hey, we need to be using more of the technology that they're using every day. We need to be focused on how do we incorporate the not just the technology itself, but the tools they're using and incorporate that more. And there's a lot of reticence to that. A lot of like, no, I don't want to do that. The interesting thing is those kids are the workers of right now.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And that's a fascinating thing. So to your point, Mallory, that's what we got to do. And we learn in micro. We learn much more in micro than we ever used to before as a result of all this technology. We're learning in these small moments.
Yeah. So Shawn and I noodled on this one because when we had chatted with you prior to bringing you on the show, you had shared with us that every task is a teaching moment. And I really loved that because it speaks to a world where people are constantly sharing knowledge and best practices and truly want to see others succeed and for the business to thrive. And I have to be honest here, this is often not the experience that many people have out there. Not to continue bringing up my past life, but job security is an all too common phrase that I used to hear all the time. And it's a nasty partner to the other thing that I used to see a lot, which is knowledge gatekeeping. And it's really just trying to protect all of the knowledge that you have to make you irreplaceable. But it actually makes you unpromotable, and it actually makes you stuck in the position that you're in. It's bad for business. It's bad for collaboration. It's a major culture killer. But at the end of the day, it's really just bad for the person who's gatekeeping. What are some of your favorite teaching moments? And how have those moments really shaped how you teach others to break down these barriers of knowledge gatekeeping?
So first of all, I love that you call it culture killer and knowledge gatekeeping. These are just cool terms that I hadn't heard before, but I love it because it perfectly expresses the situation, right? I've been in situations where even working with a client, which of course I'm external, so it's harder to get, hey, can I get that really cool deck that you showed me? Oh, it's on somebody's personal files and they're really busy and they never answer your emails and I can't get a hold of them. Why is that really awesome deck that says how great your company is and how great your product is being held by one person on their personal files on their computer? Everybody should see this. This should be central to your new hire onboarding. But yes, I think anything can be a training. Anything can be a learning moment. And I think, that culture of learning and ultimately the goal of letting it blossom where other people are teaching each other as well. It's tough to do that when people are waiting around for that official training, the big training that the training department is saying they're working on, and it'll be done next week. But next week then turns into the following week because something happens, and so training could be the knowledge gatekeeper in this situation. So I've actually seen where like a big company, they've got a huge sales force, they're switching over to a new sales app, from the old one to the new one. And in the meantime, they're working on the official training. Training finally comes out. They've already been using the new app for a month. So they've been teaching each other and just sort of swimming in the deep end to figure it out when they could have whipped something up really quick. They could have done a quick video walkthrough. They could have done just on their cell phone or using Loom on their screen. They could have taken screenshots and just said, arrow here, right here, do this. This is what's different from the old system to the new system. There's so many really easy ways to create quick content in between to fill those cracks where maybe you're waiting on somebody else or somebody is hoarding information and you're like, fine, I'll just find it myself and tell everyone. And then I think too, for the manager, from a manager standpoint, imagine if you could go on vacation knowing that your team has each other's back and they're teaching each other. I think going back to the example I used earlier, where you have someone who might be a shoo-in for your role when you get promoted. So you're a manager, you've got someone on the team. Typically, you do have someone on the team that's really good at mentoring others, and they kind of step up whenever you need somebody. And that person can kind of get the ball rolling maybe with some of these learning moments in the job, not necessarily in a training classroom or online classroom environment. I think long term, we're going to see user-generated content become more common. There are companies hiring internal influencers now. So there are people creating content just to keep the hot topics top of mind. Now, you might say, oh, that's comms, that's marketing, but chances are it's also educational. And so it does blur the lines between, is it training? Is it communication? Is it marketing? Is it content creation? At the end of the day, what do your learners need? What do your employees need? Your people need? They need information. They need to know the right things at the right moment, have it at their fingertips, not have it gatekept. And yeah, so I think it'll be really interesting to see how things grow. Again, content, user generated, having people do small, really simple content they can create in the moment to fill those cracks. But I'm seeing a shift, especially with the big companies. Once the big companies start doing this, internal content creation, whether it's educational or entertainment, other companies will follow suit. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Oh, I love that. We actually have a program that I built when I first started at Trainual. It's called the Change Champion Program, and it aims to do just that. We've actually had one of our top customers turn it into the Training Champions Program, which I thought was super cool, and I'm super stoked to talk to them about that at Playbook. But basically, it's just a way to create internal influencers who are advocates of your processes and your training, where they're not only trained to be able to, have those, micro nuggets of training popped into your training system, or communicate them out or demonstrate them, whatever it is. But they're also verbal advocates. So they're speaking really positively about the changes and about the new systems. And they're just recognized as, again, a champion. And it's a great way to almost, I don't want to say promote, but to level up people when there's not enough leadership positions. And it's just a great intermediary tool to have to be able to highlight some of your standout people. And I also want to come back to something else that you said about creating training that doesn't have to be perfect, and that you spend all of this time trying to perfect it. And then other people are like, cool, well, while you're doing that, I'm going to go figure this thing out on my own. And then I'm not even going to take your training because it's going to be a waste of time at that point. And I think Shawn talks about this all the time in such a beautiful way. And so I'm hoping he's going to end up jumping in here too. But I think people get locked in this mindset, not always of just training gatekeeping or job security, which I do think is problematic. But sometimes it's, oh, I might be the one who's hired to do this, but I don't know that I'm the expert. And what if I can't teach it perfectly? And what if it's about a reflection on me? What if it reflects poorly on me? They start kind of spiraling maybe into a little bit of imposter syndrome and perfectionism. And the thing that Shawn highlights all the time is your videos don't have to be perfect. One take. Hey guys, I know this system is just coming out. I'm learning the same way you guys are learning, but maybe we could walk through it together and kind of fumble through it. And I'm going to share this video when we reach the result that we need to reach. And it's just a conversation of let's try to learn this together over a Loom, and not, hey guys, I have every single piece of this masterfully perfected and figured out, and here's the training.
Exactly.
I learned a long time ago, again, back when I was working in education, there's two main ways to teach. You can either be a sage on the stage, or you can be a guide on the side. And those sound really cool, but I always loved that. And I learned this in a very, very poignant way. I was working with a group of students with a teacher. We're working on an online learning program that they were doing. And I watched this teacher kind of stay up at the front of the classroom while she was teaching the kids how to use this new piece of software. And there was a very distinct wall. There was absolutely a wall there between the teacher and the students. And it came to be my point in the presentation, and I've never been a big fan of presentation. I'm much more conversational. I'm much more like, hey, let's talk about this together. And I just made it a point, because this is how I roll just naturally. I went down through the aisles and got down and knelt down, put on my knee and just kind of looked over at the student to the right and just worked through them. And I'd ask them a question, hey, is this making sense? And what are you struggling with? And they'd say this, like, oh yeah, that's kind of hard. Let's work on that together. And there was something about this, like, oh, it's not a you versus us thing. It's a us together doing this thing, right? And that I've tried to translate that into, any type of training environment that I'm in. And to your point, Mallory, the videos, I think there's something about, you do a video and you're not polished, and it's okay. It's totally fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not a Hollywood production. It's you being real and conversational and teaching. Gets down to finding, again, I'm going to come back to those champions you talked about, Mallory and Sarah, because you mentioned how, like, spending time building out this whole training, and you had people doing it. Those people doing it, the ones figuring it out, those were your champions. Right. So something that you can do today in your own business is you can identify, you already know who they are, who those champions are, and you need to integrate them more into the training that you do with your team members. And Sarah, to your point, don't have to have this big, long, perfect thing. The micro pieces that you can get your champions involved in and influencing others on is going to be one of your most powerful training tools ever in your entire organization.
Absolutely. People trust others. They trust their peers more than they trust the official company channels. You see that in Google reviews. You go to Google Maps, you trust what people say in the reviews and ratings more than you trust the restaurant's website or wherever it is you're going. You see it on LinkedIn, personal accounts, even if they're talking about the company they work for, those are so engaging because people want to hear from other people, real people. They don't trust the official channels as much because, oh, it's just a marketing message. Oh, of course they're saying that. So I think, again, when it comes to training, we can borrow from these things that are clearly working so well to engage right in front of our eyes. We see it every single day.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. That's so true. Okay, I want to switch the gears now, because I want to talk about playfulness. I'm all about the fun. I know you are too. I know pop culture references are like, next nature for you. So let's talk about playfulness and learning here. I believe that learning should be fun. We don't learn when we're not engaged, and fun is a way that we engage very easily with learning. So how can we inject playfulness and fun into those topics that may be really actually super mundane? How can we do more of that? How's that even possible? And is it?
Oh, it's definitely possible. Anything is possible. So the first thing is we have to stop taking learning so seriously. And in turn, we have to stop taking ourselves so seriously. And I think that might go back to the perfectionism thing, where everyone in the company is waiting for the official training to come down on such and such date. And, they're waiting for us. And I think we've built this prison for ourselves where we are trying to make it perfect. And then nobody ends up liking it or ends up taking it at all. So I think we're acting a little bit too academic in that way, as if we are. And I know I worked for very large companies in a humongous corporate university. That's most of my full-time experience. So they are looked at as almost college level courses. It's a course catalog on everything you could possibly need to know at the company. But the more academic we get, the more we're going to lose our people. Or we're going to lose their attention. We're going to lose their engagement. And again, I said this earlier, but we should be the fun organization. This should be where people go to say, I'm going to take a break from my job momentarily, even if it's just a quick thing. And I'm going to learn something new, and I'm going to love it. And I'm going to come back to my job energized and refreshed. That's the way it should be. So some of the things that I like are reverse psychology in training. So remember when you were a kid and you'd say, oh yeah, I really love dirt or something, I don't know, something negative. And then all the kids would start saying they would like it too. It's saying something negative or antithetical to what you want to say to expose your audience to something negative because they remember the negative. So I'll give you an example of this. You've probably seen this if you're a late night video scroller like me, bad habit, but there are videos going around social media that are 1980s retro training. So the example I keep seeing is this lady, she's a cashier at a grocery store. And so she's working the line. She's got the big sign up there that says 10 items or less only. And this guy comes through the line and he's clearly got a ton of items. And so she says, sir, can't you see the sign? It's 10 items or less. And she's being incredibly rude to him and she shoves all his stuff at him. And he's like, what gives? This is horrible. This is horrible customer service. And that plays. And then immediately after that, the positive scenario plays where she's supposed to do what she's really, supposed to do in her user manual or whatever was told to her. You're supposed to let them know, hey, this is the 10 items or less line, but it's okay this time. Just for next time, know about it. So if you would have just had that positive scenario standalone, it would not have been as effective as if you had the negative and then flipped it around and showed the positive. I also think that exaggerated scenarios work really well. This was a good example of an exaggerated scenario because she was incredibly rude. And this was the 1980s when customer service was like at an all-time high. So if you're seeing, a rude customer service situation, that was probably pretty far-fetched back then. I think that's also why infomercials work, why they're so memorable. The products themselves are not that great. It's the way they present them. And I think that is kind of the same maybe psychology behind it, where you're seeing something so negative and so exaggerated and you're like, oh, I've got to fix that. Now, how do I fix that? So that's a great example. Short videos are a great example. As we mentioned, they're easy, but we're not making feature films here. We aren't even becoming famous content creators doing it. We're just getting on video and saying, hey, here's 3 things you should know this week. Maybe a manager, I like to say what managers can do themselves so they're not waiting around for official training, but maybe a manager sends out a motivational video every Monday and says, hey, this week I really want you guys to focus on this one thing and just keep it to one message. Don't ramble. I know that's really hard because we get on video and we want to say everything that we know, but just keep it to one topic. I think anytime you're making training fun and bite-sized, you really have to create it as one message, talking to an audience of one, essentially, not talking to everybody. That's kind of your sage on the stage. What was the rest of it? Sage on the stage.
Not guide on the side.
I got it. You're teaching people how, not how to do something, but maybe how you would do something, or guiding them through it, which is a totally different mindset than what we typically take in training. We're telling people how to do something rather than inviting them in.
Wait, that's training? That short little thing, that's training? What? Right? No, I love that because you're spot on, right? I think we put too much pressure on ourselves to build the big training, when micro learning, these little snippets basically of, hey, I love the way you just said, actually, Sarah, this is how I do this. Work on this week. And our follow-up will be at the end of the week. We'll touch base on this and see how it went, right? These little pieces of training go way further and are way more manageable and like digestible for a learner than, those big, long things we go to that we forget. Like you said, 70% of the information by the time we're done.
And one quick thing too, I think it would be really cool if, let's say you have your team Slack or whatever you're using. What if you ended up with a little mini library of motivational messages each week? They're just kind of compiled in a chat off to the side, and people know they can go to them at any moment and say, hey, what was that message we heard last week? It's almost like you're building a TV network of sorts, like your own little, be delusional for a second. I'm running a TV network inside my own, team. You can say that. Why not? I think that's perfectly acceptable. And that's what content ends up being. It's like your own personal network where you are talking about the hottest topics that you want your team to know.
I love it.
I love that too. Yeah, my husband, like I said, he's newly into the HVAC training role and having to, train the up and coming technicians. And he came in the other day and he goes, "Hey, what do you think about me sending a little tip every Tuesday to my team? That's just, like a minute or two on something that I think that they should remember. I want them to know. What do you think about me doing that?" And I was like, I think that's like a great idea. And it's so cool that you're brand new into this role and you're already thinking about like ways that you can implement like fast, absorbable information that they can apply. So I was really proud of him for that. But the other thing that came to mind as you were talking was the fact that for the longest time, we were stuck at 24,000 followers on our Instagram page. And our CMO said to us, like, "Hey, I have this crazy idea. What if we start sharing humorous work-related content in the form of memes and reels about our business?" And I think a lot of us were reluctant, or maybe even I'd use the word nervous, to do something so out there. But, obviously seeing tons of meme pages have success with it and just thinking, okay, like how can we do this, but still be hitting on the important things that we want to hit on, which is we're not just a funny page to follow, but we are solving problems that real world businesses face. And so it made me think about the fact that every single day that I or my team shares a meme or a reel on IG, we are teaching a 15-second lesson. And you might think that you're taking in just a funny meme or a reel and, oh my gosh, Trainual is so funny and I'm going to like this, or I'm going to comment, or I'm going to share it to a friend. But I just taught you a lesson. And every time you see a meme or a reel, you realize that Trainual is solving real world problems. And you're like, oh, hey, I think they just shared a meme about the fact that I can't take PTO without getting a million text messages or Slack messages from my team about processes. Pretty sure their product solves that problem. Let me go back and find that meme that I shared to a friend or that I saved. And so I love to hear you talk about that because it's so true. In today's world, you can teach micro lessons in 15 seconds. 15 seconds, I could teach you a lesson.
Yep. And that's why I mentioned earlier, we learn all the time and don't even realize it. So it could be something non-work related. It could be work related. And I think when you realize it's education in a wrapper of something else, it's wrapped up in funny or entertaining or whatever it is. And if we just kind of relax our shoulders for a second and see what works out there and what we like, we're also the audience. We can say, hey, that meme was so funny. Maybe we can be a funny, the fun department or the funny department, and we can do these things. And it's a mini lesson or a mini moment and it connects, right? That's why I like pop culture references, because even if you haven't seen the show or the movie that you're referencing, you still can get the gist of it. You still know what they're trying to say. If I say, this famous scene in Seinfeld, you're still explaining the scene and the lesson that comes out of it. You don't have to have had to see the scene in order to understand what the message is.
Yeah, 100%. I love it. Let's stay on the theme of learners, because I love what you say. I say this all the time, that we are learners first, right? That's what we are. We learn everything in life. And so, because they are the reason that we're having this conversation right now. That's I want to draw us to our attention here. Any team, large or small, you're always going to have a mix of, like, from self-starters to the people who you're going to have to like pull them by the hands to like do things and walk them through. You're going to have those who prefer step-by-step guidance. You're going to have some who want hands-on practice. Some of them just give me the dang manual and I'll read the manual, right? You've got the whole gamut there. So this is probably one of the biggest challenges that I have seen people face in terms of training. And that is, how do you create training that works for such diverse types of learners on your team?
Yeah. That's a huge one. So number one, I think content helps with that, because content can be changed so quickly. If it's not hitting, the next one might. Like we've been saying, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we can figure out what's the right sort of sweet spot where everybody is resonating with whatever messages you're putting out. So it's content versus curriculum. And curriculum is the traditional training. That's our training courses, whether online or in person. And then filling in the gaps with content where you can maneuver easily with content. What was content a week ago may not even be relevant a week later. So it's actually good. That's a good thing. It's relevant to the moment, to right now. And you can flex so much easier with something like that. So, filling in the gaps with that is something I would highly suggest. And then I just think in general, we're going to see leaders realizing that what we're spending money on is exactly what learners don't want. So if we can have that conversation around money might be the way to get through to leaders. And knowing your team's motivators too, what motivates your team. There might be someone who on the team is really good at being under pressure or being hit with a challenge. They might thrive in that kind of thing. So maybe you need to go above and beyond and tell them, hey, this week I want you to hit these 3 things. Whereas somebody else might totally crack under that pressure. And for them, it's more fun and lightheartedness, and maybe family is really important to them. So getting them to get their work done so they can leave early and have a half day or something like that might motivate them. What's the reward at the end if maybe they are, finishing a bunch of learning tasks or something. I think the last thing I want to say is it's not only just diverse learning preferences, but we're in multi-generational work teams, which we always have been. But now that us millennials are not the youngest anymore, it's more apparent and more obvious.
Right.
We're not the special ones anymore. So I think that's a big thing too, because, millennials were Generation Y, the letter Y, but also WHY. We questioned everything. But I know for me personally, I entered the workplace in 2008, really 2006, but I was still in college. So my first full-time job was 2008. And I'm sure you all remember that was the Great Recession. It was a horrible time. Nobody was rolling out the red carpet for us. Nobody was. It was, you get in line, you do as things have always been done. There's a way it's always been done, and you're going to do it that way. We don't care that you're innovative. We don't care that you're creative. And I think that's changed a lot. So I think with this younger generation entering the workplace, they've been in the workplace for a few years now. I think it's interesting because they will walk. They will put their money where their mouth is. They will take the actions that we as millennials wish we could have done, but we felt so, we need a job. We can't leave this job. We can't say, oh, the training is horrible here, so I'm just going to walk away. No, we just stayed and dealt with it. Even though we wanted to, we were always questioning things and questioning the way things were done. So I think it's really interesting to take into consideration that this younger generation, I think, has a lot of power and a lot to say. And that's something really cool to consider when it comes to how we train. We have to keep up.
The force is strong with that generation. And Shawn's going to be so proud of that quote, even though I've never seen those movies.
You nailed it.
Same here.
But I'm telling you what, these Gen Z kids and these Gen Alpha kids are like, you know what? If the training sucks here and the processes are behind the times and you don't want to change, then I'm going to go start this same company and I'm going to do it better and I'm going to do it the right way. And they do. They're out here just starting up new companies and doing their own thing. So they are not a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
They're fearless.
I heard you say a couple of things there that were really, really strong that I wanted to call out. First of all, it's getting to know your learners, getting to know the people on your team and what their preferences are. Because we can sit here and we can talk about, we'll do this in your team and do this in your team, do this in your team. And those may work. They may not work at all. Right. So getting to know what the preferences are of your team and then using that knowledge to create a nice mix of and diverse content. I run our Trainual University content here at Trainual, and that is where we are able to have our customers use our program to learn how to use our program, right? And so we are able to keep that up to date very frequently. And we do that on purpose because we want to get that micro learning feel, right? We make a new change in the program that gets updated right away. They get notified so they can go in and do that training. There's a nice diverse mix of multimedia and text and even activities and assessments and other things they're doing. We do that very intentionally because we know we've got different types of people out there that are doing this. And it's not a one size fits all. I was looking at a feedback this morning saying, hey, there was too many gifts in there. Okay. Too many gifts. Like, oh, they're so, but then the one right next to us, I loved all the gifts, so you're not going to hit everyone 100%. But to your point, again, knowing your learners and building to them is the way to really nail this to the floor.
And I love how you both pronounce it GIF and not GIF. It's GIF. I know the owner or creator calls it GIF, but I'm still going to call it GIF.
I'm with you.
Jif is peanut butter. That is all.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
And gift sounds like a gift. I'm gifting you with a gift.
I'm glad that we're all on the same page on that one. That's very important to me. So
that would have been a horrible battle. We would be
back and forth.
Pineapple on pizza. Are we going to agree on that or no? I think it's a yes.
Agreed.
Yes.
100%.
Oh, wow. Okay. See, we're all kindred here.
One more. Is the thumbs up in Slack, is it positive, neutral, or is it passive aggressive?
It feels passive aggressive. Whether it actually is intended that way or not.
Oh,
okay. There we go.
I purposely don't use it because I don't want people to get the wrong impression because that is a common perception.
I'm at the early part. I'm like one of the oldest millennials, right? Yeah.
We're just out here collecting votes.
What is your take? Did you say yes or no, Freddie?
Yeah, we've debated this before. I have been getting over the fact that I used to think it was passive aggressive, but Trainual people are just very comfortable with it and use it in a positive way. So I've tried getting on board, but now that people know kind of where I stand on it, they're like, wait, so now when you use it, are you being passive aggressive? So,
it comes with a disclaimer, it's like thumbs up, disclaimer, this is a positive thumbs up, so
yeah.
So you know.
Well, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about company training, which is just one side of learning. But another side that we haven't touched on yet is the need for professional and personal development training. Because if you're doing training right, then you have learners who feel like it is a lifelong pursuit, and knowledge, which you actually said earlier, is the ultimate power in your life and your career. But personal development can be hard to squeeze in, even harder than company training even, which is already sometimes just tough. And we've talked about boring if not done right. And so it's like, oh, now I got to squeeze in all this time to actually engage in the things that I'm interested in, which I guess now that I'm thinking about it out loud should be easier, right? Because we are super passionate about those things. But I'm still curious if you have any tips for folks who want to dive into more personal learning and how they can make that a manageable journey in otherwise extremely busy lives that we all lead.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the ultimate thing is to find what you gravitate to, and maybe that you're learning from a person that you like and enjoy. I think marketing uses this know, like, and trust thing, and content creators use it too. So basically, if you know somebody who's teaching you something, you know them, you like them, and you trust them, now you're going to be more inclined to learn more from them or want to learn more from them. And so that's something I would tell, even for internal training, that could be something to follow. But the main thing is you're not going to learn anything if it feels like a chore. So you have to find what works for you. I like podcasts on my walks. So I take long walks to the coffee shop in my neighborhood, and it's this peaceful thing. I like to do the whole romanticizing my life where I pretend like I'm in a Hallmark movie and I say hello to everyone I pass by, and I'm just feeling great and, getting out in the sunshine, and it just feels awesome. So if you don't have that and you're in a commute and you're in traffic, you could also do podcasts, and maybe that brings some lightness and fun to your commute, but then you're learning something at the same time. So figuring out what fits your life, because we are all busy and we're all inundated with information. So whether that's someone you like learning from, a format you like learning from, or even a style, like master classes became such a thing in the last few years, and everybody's got a course, it seems. So it's just endless. You got to find what you truly like and then just go for it.
I love that. I'm a very neurodivergent learner, and I feel like that's like something that people aren't super comfy talking about. And so if anybody's out there listening, I hope their ears perked up like, oh my gosh, somebody's actually going to talk about this, because I just cannot sit through a long podcast or a long training video. I like the snippets. I like the highlights. I like the chapter markers. I like skipping to the things I want to hear about. And sometimes that gets me hooked and I want to learn more, but it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about creating the recaps that Shawn and I do for these, where it's like, here's the things that you can move to that maybe you resonate with. Here are the actions or the steps that you can take. Like, we try to give it to you in really digestible chunks of information. And so for me, with having a more neurodivergent brain when it comes to learning, I like things that are quick. So I actually listen to most things on 2x, and people are like, that's crazy. How do you absorb anything? And I can't pay attention at 1x. I absorb and retain so much more information if you're talking to me at the speed of light. I don't know why that is. It just is what it is. So I would say listening to things either slower or faster is one tip that I would say. And then when I, talk about the personal and professional development piece that we're talking about, another thing that I like to do is use AI. So you could just prompt your AI to say, hey, you are Sarah Berry, and you are just masterful at training and creating engaging processes and sharing information. Prompt it with like the personality of like your mentorship dreams, right? Like everything you want in the best mentor ever. And then start asking it questions. And I bet you walk away with some really solid advice or things that you can do or things that you can explore. So that's like one way that I think people can dig into personal and professional development in a timely manner. And the other thing that I really love, I actually did a partnership with them a few years ago, is the company Blinkist, and there's another one called Headway, and they teach you snippets from podcasts or from books in 15-minute increments. So they're taking all the best parts of that book and they're feeding it to you in cards, essentially, that are about 2 to 4 minutes long each, and a total of 15 minutes for the entire book. And then if you're like, wow, this resonated, I want to dig into this further, you can go listen to the 2x audiobook, or you can read it if paper is your jam. But I think that there are like all these sneaky little ways that you can incorporate training for, one, your learning style, and two, your professional development goals.
I think that's the moral of the story, is we have to sneak it in there. All learning needs to be just snuck right in there into something that you're already doing or you already enjoy.
So true. Well, this was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. This was such a fun conversation. Can you tell folks where they can follow you?
Yes. Everything is on LinkedIn. I'm going all in on LinkedIn.
Awesome. What's your @ on LinkedIn? Or I guess it would be your slash.
Yeah, my slash. Unfortunately, my name was already taken by the time I did so it's my last name dash my first name. So Berry dash Sarah. Maybe I'll change it one day. But again, by the time you get around to it, your name is already taken. You don't want to add numbers. I had a similar thing happen when Gmail started in 2005. I felt like I was one of the first people to get to it. Nope, name already taken.
I don't know though. That's like a really retainable handle, like @ Berry Sarah, because it sounds like Very Sarah. Like that's so cute.
Yeah, it is cute.
Well,
yes. And people do call me by my last name sometimes, so it fits. It's
Very
great.
Sarah.
I love. Well, be sure to click the link in our show notes for a made-for-you process template that highlights all the best practices today for how to make training more fun and engaging with Sarah Berry. We are super excited to share that with you. As always, document your processes and please be a good human. We will catch you next time.